what we get at the end of that prologue is the statement from the author of John that no one has ever known God. No one has ever seen God. But the Son has revealed who God is. Mm-hmm. The Son is that connecting point. And that is the difference between what has come before, what has changed now in the Incarnation, to what we're experiencing now. Mm-hmm. Beforehand, and this is where we get out of the epistolary from the New Testament letters, in impartial and imperfect ways. We have known about God, we might say. And now the table has turned entirely. We know God because God has entered into relationship with us in a new way, in a very particular way. So all this to say, again, to reiterate the point that relationship stands at the center of the gospel. And it's, in some sense, a human relationship. You know, I was talking with somebody about the book the other day, and I was making the point that I try to make a lot, and that's, you know, we'd like to think of God as like so different from us. I think a lot of people tend to think of a very transcendent God. God is so other. You know, the only time I go to God is when I want to ask for something or I need something, like some sort of genie out in outer space or something like this. And they want to say, well, God's not like everybody else, so how can you talk about dating God? But it's true, God is not like everybody else. You know, God is not human. But I said, but wait a minute, we do believe in the Incarnation, right? So God knows something about what it means to be human and to be in a human relationship. So at the center of the gospel is the Incarnation. It's about knowing God in a new way, and that continues, you know, in our own experience. So if the gospel is about relationship, and the Incarnation stands at the center of that, what is Franciscan spirituality about? What's Franciscan life about? You know, simply put, and probably a cliche at this point, it's about relationship. You know, to live the Holy Gospel according to Jesus Christ, which is how all of our rules begin. If you're a secular Franciscan, folks in the back, the third order regular Franciscans, the Poor Clares. I said something about this the other day somewhere. I said, you know, any second order Franciscans in here? And I said, that's your question. If you're here, then you should be here. I'll learn your address immediately. So, how did you sneak in here? You got out of the monastery. You know, or the first order. So, I mean, we all begin, and then this extends, of course, to those who identify themselves, as we do here, as Franciscan-hearted people. So people who are not in SFOs or any of the other Franciscan more formal ways of living. The gospel then becomes the focus of Franciscan life. And I think what's interesting about that is, as we look at the sources, as we look at the early biographies, the hagiography of Francis, we see that what distinguishes him is putting relationship, putting the knowing of others before other interests, before his own self-interest. And I'm reminded of a line that I've really come to like over the years that our confrere Ken Himes, who many of you might know, said at the occasion of the inauguration of Kevin Mullen, who's the current president of Siena College, another friar from our community. And he said, you know, the reason why Francis was able to engage with so many different people, whether it was the Pope or whether it was a leper on the street, the reason why he was able to cross the borders of the Crusades and interact with others was because nobody ever looked in Francis's eyes and saw greed or lust for power. That what he was there to do was just to be in relationship with others. And I mean, that leads to certain other ways of living in the world, but that was the centerpiece of his life. And it wasn't his doing, it was the gospel that he lived, this idea of relationship at the heart of the gospel. I think it's important, too, to remember that Francis didn't start his way of life living that way. You know, because that's one of the things, too, that I think I personally get hung up on sometimes, and I think a lot of folks do when they look at the example of Francis of Assisi or Clare or some of the early Franciscan saints or even some great models of Franciscan life today. It's like, well, they weren't born that way, and Francis wasn't either, and I think we forget that he didn't like pop out like into the world as a little baby saint, you know, and then go about his life, you know.
He didn't have his brown robes on.
He didn't have his brown robes on, yeah. He didn't, he wasn't like the curious case of Benjamin Button meets Francis of Assisi or something, like a reverse saint. It didn't happen that way. In fact, his own conversion story reveals a lot to us about how that takes time. You know, the dates, of course, are contested by different Franciscan historians, but we could say it took maybe 3 or 4 years from the time that he started doing something kind of weird and really ticking off his parents to the time that he made a dramatic, very serious break with his social position and with you know, striving to live a very particular way where people were starting to follow him. It took a long time, and when Francis set out, he set out to do something on his own. He set out to live his own life in a particular way. He wanted to live the gospel. He wanted to rebuild the church, and came to realize, perhaps as we read in the sources, not by his own volition, but came to realize that he couldn't do it by himself. That the Spirit had other plans for him. That other people came and were attracted and wanted to live in community with him. But even the sort of concrete way he wanted to live in the world, to live the gospel life, required that he was in relationship with others. And I think that changed him. I think that's one of the challenges for us today, that it changes us.